there is always a gap, but the gap is bigger depending on the country where you live. This reflects what the society is. But if I go to a society where an operator earns much less than I do, then the dialogue is much more difficult because these two sides are not listening to each other. So I think that there is a gap. There is a gap, but it's not a gap of the water sector. It's a gap of the society that actually is reflected also in the water sector.
So the gap exists as it exists in many other industries, and it's basically about, for me, incapability of communicating to people who are not necessarily owning your same mindset and your same background, and also sometimes the incapability to understand before starting a project who are the relevant stakeholders and whose opinions should be heard in a certain discussion.
I think the major impact of this knowledge gap between practitioners and researchers is that in many cases, whatever people research and do some work on is not really executed on the ground. In addition to that, there's always this overlap and repetition. We see many projects that have similar goals but do not cooperate together because they either don't have any idea of some research that they can back up their work on, or because they are not aware that there's some experts other than them on the ground who are working on similar topics.
I think that the knowledge gap comes down to an effective communication from both parties, so science researchers and academics. I think it's because we speak different languages. I think that's something that comes up a lot, not just in the water sector, but in many sectors. And obviously, academics and researchers speak an academic language, use different terminologies to explain, maybe simplify things that could be simplified for the practitioners and the operators.
The core point is one, namely is the incapability so far, given incentives and structures in the different disciplines and in the different professions, to work in silos. By working in silos, basically what you do is that you close your eyes, you do like those eyes protections that oars have, and you're not able to see what is actually required at systemic level to tackle a problem which by nature requires systemic solutions. So if you look at water management as a topic and you look at all the different implications that water has on communities worldwide, from agriculture, from obviously drinking water, from water, non-potable water, to security and peace. So how also water can be a matter of conflict nowadays. Then you understand that it cannot be tackled by one sector or one discipline alone.
And I may note here that that is especially true in some developing countries or Arab countries, because we see that many water sector managers or people who work in this sector do not really have this deep knowledge or even updated knowledge about water issues and how they can tackle them. So they would definitely need this sort of bridge between them and the experts to learn what they can do differently, what they can update, what they can change in their projects, and how they can do so effectively by not repeating what others have been doing. That is especially true in some rural areas where we see practitioners who are really part of the community. So they think that they know enough, they know the area enough, and no scientist can know more than they do in their region.
And so in speaking these different languages, sometimes I think we get into our bubbles, our expertise bubbles, and we don't often have the time or capacity to work further on these things, right? Because often we get into our work and then we have to just do what we need to do, and then we don't even think, oh, today I'm going to go and look on what's on the academic side of things and see if I can improve my innovation. Capacity, not just in terms of time, but also in terms of the ability to understand the different sectors, because traditionally we're trained and educated in siloed approaches, I think. Now, obviously, there's more and more multidisciplinary things happening. But operators are trained to do operational things, and academics are generally quite academic. And obviously there's lots of science to practice now, and that's KWR's motto, is bridging science to practice.
Imagine what it is if everyone, when they are talking to each other, everyone is worried about making pitches. So that means that nobody is listening. We are always trying to promote ourselves. Once more, the reality is not homogeneous between all countries, of course, right? But in principle, the academics are there to make fundamental research that does not necessarily immediately comes out to practice, but there's lots of knowledge that is also being produced as applied research.
I think the knowledge gap between practitioners themselves, especially in our region here in the Mediterranean and in the MENA region, is mainly because of sometimes some political aspect of it. So you might find some ministries who do not even talk because the ministers are from different political parties, let's say. So their employees do not work together and collaborate on topics. This gap, mainly we need to build communities that not only try to bring these different stakeholders together to discuss issues, but also to show them that these water management issues are truly the same for everyone.
Give you an example, for instance, from an external viewpoint, looking at what research has been done and also what approach in political terms has been done towards water management is very much supply driven. So it's basically saying how much water should be distributed for local communities, for industry, for agriculture. And if this question is not integrated in the equation, if it's only a matter of supply, you clearly see that there is a gap. Not only now research is being communicated, but also research is being done in the first place.
So the way to overcome this gap sometimes is to put an intermediate in between. And countries like the Netherlands and the institution that I work for, KWR, are doing exactly that role, because sometimes you need an intermediate just to bring one knowledge to the other side, right?
I guess there's a few things here. So there's obviously having these kind of more informal events where water sector people or people from the water sector and many different walks can come together and just openly discuss in a very informal manner and perhaps share and exchange knowledge in that way. And that's what we aim to do in Blue Drinks. And we had a lot of academics actually joining us from the different institutions here in the Netherlands. But then we also definitely had some people who are more on the practical side of things and the water technology side of things who were less so on the academic side, and they were sharing and exchanging and asking questions. And I think that's also a really important thing, is that giving these informal situations and settings for knowledge exchange can really increase the innovation potential and also pique people's interest to say, maybe I should apply this at my work.
It all starts with a systemic vision of a challenge that you want to address. Nowadays, we are facing gigantic challenges from a variety of perspectives, environmental, economic, and social, pandemics being just an addition to them. And if you really want to tackle this challenge, you can't, by definition, have an approach, let it be in policymaking or in research, which only looks at one part of the problem. Just as a final remark, again, I think it's really important to make this step of looking at a problem from a very systems thinking perspective. And this is easy to say, but it's, I think, much harder to do in practice.
KWR, we recently published a publication on how to effectively communicate during a public health crisis. Came up with a research report and 15 guiding principles on how to effectively communicate science during a crisis. And we did this because at KWR we wanted to help our colleagues who are at the moment communicating on COVID-19 and sewage surveillance be able to improve their communication skills.
I think it all starts with the policymakers and people who are actually influencing or even drafting these policies. I think they are the most impactful or influential aspect of the entire community building. From my experience, I think that what academics can do is to come with an open mind and actually encourage these policymakers in their countries to form such communities?
I think that in order to have a dialogue between academy and practitioners, we have to empower practitioners. We have to tell them what you are doing is you are doing well, and your knowledge is very valid. So we need your knowledge. Put up these practitioners on the same level as the academics, so empower them. Tell them that what they are doing is important, because it actually is.